everyone. Today I would like to inform you all of the many valuable concepts I've learned while taking human growth and development. I will be sharing my information in the order listed on our assignment. First, I want to begin by explaining just what human growth and development actually means. Human growth refers to the way people grow and change across the lifespan. Human development is the way that humans adapt and change throughout one's individual lifetime. Examining people's biological, cognitive, and psychological states, and also how they interact with others, are ever-changing components that we can use to examine human development. Now let's discuss the stages and ages of human growth and development. It begins in the prenatal development stage, which lasts from conception to birth. This stage is broken down into 3 periods of development. The first is the germinal period, which is the first 2 weeks. Second is the embryonic period, which is the first 3 to 8 weeks. And lastly is the fetal period, which is week 9 to birth. The next is the infancy and toddlerhood stage, which lasts from 0 to 36 months. Primary emotions begin to develop in the infancy stage, but sadness develops after the infancy stage. Toddlerhood is a time when gross and fine motor skills begin to flourish. In toddlerhood, neurons in the brain begin to double in quantity as the brain rapidly grows in this stage of development. Early childhood is the following stage that lasts from 3 to about 5 years. It is important for the child to receive good nutritional meals to ensure they do not get sick. Even in developed countries, children are much more vulnerable in this stage of their life than in any other. The middle childhood stage begins after the child turns 6 and ends once they enter the adolescent stage at 12 years old. In middle childhood, a child will develop even stronger gross motor skills and become more active in sports and play. Adolescence begins after this stage and lasts until they are 20 years old. This is usually when people will begin to go through puberty and develop pubic hair and prepare for adulthood. Too often we see people develop eating disorders during this particular phase of life. The early adulthood stage begins when a person turns 20 and ranges to 40 years. Peak physical development occurs in this stage and aging begins. Middle adulthood is a stage after a person turns 40 and lasts until they reach 60 years of age. We begin to see a decline in the sensory functioning, and gray hair may begin to appear. Overall, vision declines the most in this stage of development. After a person turns 60, they are now entering the late adulthood stage, which lasts until they reach death. It is predicted that there will be an overabundance in the near future of those who are over the age of 60 in the years to come. Death and dying can happen at any time throughout a person's life, but if they live an average lifespan, then they will eventually reach this final stage of their lifespan in development. The afterlife stage is not something that everyone believes to be a stage of life. Different religious views are what truly determines if a person believes there is life after death, although it has not been scientifically proven. There are many theories of how we develop that have been formulated by some well-known theorists to explain in detail chronologically how and when we develop through our life. Sigmund Freud, Erik Erikson, and Jane Paget are a few theorists to name that have a detailed theory for the many stages of life. Sigmund Freud's theory of life is broken into 5 stages: oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. In the oral stage, which lasts from birth to 18 months, the baby begins to use its mouth more to interact with the world. In the anal stage, which lasts from 18 months to 3 years, this is when the child develops a recognition for having to use the bathroom, and potty training may begin. In the phallic stage, which lasts from 3 years to 5 years, the child becomes aware of anatomical sex differences, which sets in motion the conflicts between erotic attraction, resentment, rivalry, jealousy, and fear, which Freud called the Oedipus complex in boys and the Electrica complex in girls. Next is the latency stage, which is from 6 years to early teens. No further psychosexual development takes place during this stage. Latin means hidden. The libido is dormant. Freud thought that most sexual impulses are repressed during the latent stage, and children begin to develop hobbies and friendships. And next is the genital stage, which begins in the teens and throughout adulthood. It is a time of adolescence, sexual experimentation, and the successful resolution of settling down in a loving one-on-one relationship with another person in about our 20s. The next theory is by Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. It begins with trust versus mistrust. In the infancy stage, ages 0 to 1.5, a sense of trust requires a feeling of physical comfort and minimal amount of fear about the future. Infants' basic needs are met by responsive, sensitive caregivers. Next is the autonomy versus shame and doubt. These are toddler years, ages 1.5 to 3. After gaining trust, infants discover they have a will. They assert their sense of autonomy or independence. If restrained or punished too harshly, they are likely to develop a sense of shame or doubt. Next is Erikson's stage of initiative versus guilt, which develops during ages 3 to 5. Children begin preschool and learn to initiate tasks and carry out plans. During middle childhood, between the ages of about 6 and 11, children enter the psychosocial stage known as industry versus inferiority. As children engage in social interactions with friends and academic activities at school, they begin to develop a sense of pride and accomplishment in their work and abilities. Erikson's next stage is the identity versus role confusion. This begins in the teens and lasts until their 20s. Teenagers work at refining a sense of self by testing roles and then integrating them in a form of personal sense of self. Intimacy versus isolation begins at age 20 and lasts up to a person's ages 40. Young adults struggle to form close relationships and to gain the capacity for intimate love, or they feel socially isolated. Marriage usually occurs at this age. The next stage is genervarity versus stagnation. From ages 40s to 60s, the Middle Ages discover a sense of contributing to the world, usually through family or work. They will feel a lack of purpose. The next stage is ego integrity versus despair. This occurs in late adulthood when people review their lives, and if satisfied, they will experience ego integrity. Or if not, they may feel a sense of despair. Lastly, we have Jean Piaget's stages of cognitive development. First, we have the sensory motor stage, which is during the infancy stages, ages 0 to 2. Babies become capable of coordinating the activities of the senses with motor activities. Next, we have the pre-operational stage, lasting throughout early childhood, ages 2 to 7 years old. Children become capable of symbolic representation, such as in language, but with limited ability to use mental operations. The third stage of Piaget's theory is the concrete operational stage during the middle childhood, ages 7 to 11 years. Children become capable of using mental operations, but only in concrete, immediate experience. They have difficulty thinking in past or future tense. The final stage is the formal operational stage. It lasts through adolescence and into adulthood, 12 years throughout the rest of their life. They are capable of thinking logically and abstractly, capable of formulating hypotheses and testing them systematically. Their thinking is now more complex. It's interesting that both theories focus more on early development, stating that crucial stages of development occur in the first 10 years of life. Erik Erikson had stages throughout an entire person's life, and even went as far as to characterize late adulthood as a stage of development. Theorists like Paget, however, give a much more broader stage of development for adulthood. Paget lists the ages 12 to adulthood as the last step of his theory of development. It's interesting to see just how differently theorists can interpret life and its many stages of growth. Research is a careful and detailed study into a specific problem, concern, or issue using the scientific method. It is useful to the field of human development and allows researchers to better understand how and why we develop the way that we do. To conduct useful and professional research, we must follow a step-by-step process to find solutions to the many questions researchers have. The process is known as the scientific method. The scientific method is broken down into 5 steps. The first is identifying a question to be investigated. Second is forming a hypothesis. Third is choosing a research measurement like a questionnaire or a research design. 4 is collecting data to test the hypothesis. And 5 is drawing conclusions that lead to new questions and new hypotheses. By doing so, you can further accentuate another scientist's findings by brainstorming better solutions. When sperm and ovum unite to become a zygote, the beautiful development of humans begins, and about 9 months later, a fully formed human will be born. The first 2 weeks after fertilization, the germinal period begins. This is when cell division first occurs. Next is the embryonic period, lasting from 3 to 8 weeks. The baby now becomes an embryo during this phase. Next is the fetal period, lasting from week 9 to birth. This is when the important body systems and structures begin to form. A pregnancy is divided into 3 stages known as trimesters. The first trimester is week 1 to the end of week 12. The next stage of the pregnancy is known as the second trimester. The second trimester lasts from week 13 to the end of week 26. The third trimester is from week 27 to the end of the pregnancy. The birthing process happens just after the prenatal developmental stage. The first stage of the birthing process is when the neck of the womb opens to 10 centimeters dilated. Following that, the second stage is when the baby moves down through the vagina and is born. After the baby is born, the third stage begins. The third stage is when the placenta or the afterbirth is delivered. Sometimes neonates or babies are born with an extremely low birth weight. This can be very harmful to the child. Neonates are considered to have low birth weight if they are born weighing less than 5.8 pounds. Preterm neonates is a term used for babies born 3 or more weeks earlier than the optimal 40 weeks after conception. Other low birth weight neonates are small for date. These neonates weigh less than 90% of the average for other neonates who were born at the same gestational age, which is the number of weeks since conception. Typically, small for date neonates are at a higher risk with an infant death rate 4 times higher than preterm infants. The consequences of low birth weight are extremely high and can result in fatalities if proper care isn't given. They are more prone to getting sick or getting an infection. Kangaroo care is a commonly used treatment to help low birth weight babies, which provides the child with skin-on-skin contact from the mother. Many interesting developments occur in the brain in early human development. The production of neurons start by week 7 of the prenatal development. The first year is a peak time for the development of connections among neurons. At birth, the neurons have relatively few connections, but by age 2, neurons are connected to hundreds or even thousands of other cells. The greatest density of connections appears in toddlerhood, from ages 1 to 3. Changes in a child's physical growth are evident by examining their height, weight, body proportion, posture, and teeth, which is apparent once the child reaches toddlerhood. There are also many important language milestones that occur during infancy and toddlerhood. By 2 months, babies begin to coo, and by 4 or 10 months, they begin babbling. By 8 to 10 months, babies begin saying simple phrases like bye-bye. By 10 to 12 months, babies can now comprehend simple sentences and words. By 1 year, children usually speak their first word. Gross motor skills develop very early on for infants. Gross motor skills are larger movements that babies make. These are usually movements using their arms, legs, feet, or entire body. Examples of this are crawling, running, and jumping, which is a good example of gross motor skills. Fine motor skills are smaller actions. Neonates can control their mouths, face, lips, tongue, and these skills develop stronger as time progresses. Parents may start to develop parenting styles as the baby grows older. There are 4 parenting styles theorists have outlined for us to examine. The styles are authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and uninvolved. The authoritarian parenting style usually has high behavioral standards, strict punishment of misconduct, and little communication. The next and much better parenting style is authoritarian. The authoritarian style has high demandingness, high responsiveness. They exercise power but are also willing to respond to children's opinions and encourage independence and validates the child. The next style is permissive. Permissive parents have high nurturance and communication, but little discipline, guidance, or control. Lastly, we have the uninvolved parenting style. This style doesn't nurture or guide the child, few rules or expectations, and doesn't know what is happening with children. Parenting styles overall can affect many aspects of a child's life. It can even affect their sense of self. Their self-concept is how they perceive and evaluate themselves, but can be damaged due to parenting styles which can affect their self-esteem or sense of worth. Many versions of oneself has been identified as components of people's minds. The actual self is the person's perception of the self as it is, contrasted with the possible self. Ideal self is a person and what they would like to be. Feared self is what a person imagines is possible to become but dreads it. False self is what a person may present to others even while realizing it. Different cultures and religions have different views on how one should view oneself, and usually stems from their upbringing, which is why it is crucial to raise children with a positive parenting style. Humans also go through a process known as puberty, which may also affect oneself. Hormonal changes can affect mood, and it's important to recognize and understand the changes that occur during puberty. There is an increase in sex hormones. This leads to the development of primary reproduction and secondary sex characteristics. Secondary sex characteristics include pubic hair, breasts, and voice changes. The hypothalamus, or the lower part of the brain, begins to trigger ovaries and testes to produce sex hormones. The sex hormone for men, known as androgen, releases a hormone known as testosterone. The female sex hormone estrogen releases oestradiol. The menarche is the first period, which usually occurs between ages 12 and 15. Spermarchy is the term used to describe a man's first ejaculation. Research has found that in adolescence, increased myelination occurs in the frontal lobe, and the cerebellum continues to grow. Next, I want to basically just describe some of the terms that I've learned while taking this course. I want to begin with culture, which is a total pattern of group customs, beliefs, arts, and technology. Ethnicity is the group's identity that may include components such as cultural origin, cultural traditions, race, religion, and language. Total fertility rate is a standard demographical indicator used internationally to estimate the average number of children that a woman would have over her childbearing years, based on current birth trends. Genes is a basic unit of heredity responsible for storing genetic information and transmitting it to subsequent generations. Socioeconomical status is the social standing or class of an individual or group. It is often measured by a combination of education, income, and occupation. Globalization is a word used to describe the growing interdependence of the world's economies, cultures, and populations. Chromosome is a structure found inside the nucleus of a cell. A chromosome is made up of proteins and DNA organized into genes. Each cell normally contains 23 pairs of chromosomes. Deoxyribonucleic acid is the chemical name for the molecule that carries genetic instructions in all living things. The DNA molecule consists of two strands that wind around one another to form a shape known as a double helix. Genotype is an individual's collection of genes, while phenotype is the actual characteristics that are derived from a person's genotype. Sex chromosomes are chromosomes that determine whether an organism is male, XY, or female, XX. Zygote is a new cell formed by fertilization. Oxytocin is a hormone released by pituitary glands that cause labor to begin. A neonate is a newborn baby up to 4 weeks old. Reflexes are automatic responses to certain stimulations. In vitro fertilization is a form of infertility treatment that involves using drugs to stimulate the growth of multiple follicles in the ovaries, removing the follicles and combining them with sperm, and then transferring the most promising zygotes to the uterus. Cognition is defined as the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and senses. Kwashiorkor is a protein deficiency in childhood leading to symptoms such as lethargy, irritability, thinning hair, and swollen body, which can be fatal if not treated. Gender are cultural categories of male or female, while sex is the biological status of being male or female. Obesity is the excessive amount of fat on the body that can be damaging to one's health. Intelligence is the ability to acquire and retain information and solve problems, while an intellectual disability is when a person scores an IQ of 70 or less. Commercial sex exploitation is the forcing of one to engage in sex for work. Language is a way of communication by the use of spoken or written words or by the use of symbols. VO2 max is a measure of the maximum amount of oxygen your body can utilize during exercise. Tertiary education is education or training beyond secondary education. Menopause is the end of the monthly ovulation and menstruation that occurs in midlife. Fluid intelligence is a type of intelligence that involves information processing abilities such as short-term memory and the ability to discern between the visual stimuli and the speed of synthesizing new information. And lastly is crystallized intelligence, which means the accumulation of a person's culturally based knowledge, language, and understanding of social conventions. Next, I want to discuss the STIs that I've learned about in the semester. An STI is a sexually transmitted infection that is transmitted through sexual contact caused by bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Chlamydia is the most common bacterial STI in the United States. It is accompanied with unusual discharge, burning sensation when urinating, or frequent urination, as well as low-grade fever, which are common symptoms of chlamydia. Gonorrhea is the second most notifiable disease. Early symptoms include a watery discharge from the penis or increased vaginal discharge. Other symptoms include burning and pain during urination. Another common STI is syphilis. Many of the signs and symptoms of syphilis are indistinguishable from those of other diseases. Genital human papillomavirus or HPV symptoms usually appear 6 weeks to 8 weeks after exposure. Most infected people are asymptomatic and most infections are temporary. Genital warts usually appear moist, pink, or flesh-colored swellings. Kohlberg's theory of moral development is how people develop moral reasoning. Her theory has 3 levels, 2 stages within each level. The pre-moral level focuses on external authority. The first stage of this level is punishment and obedience orientation. The second stage is instrumental relativism. Next is the conventional morality, which explains how moral reason externally driven based on the social environment. The third stage of this level is interpersonal concordance. The fourth stage is social maintaining law and order orientation. The last level in Kohlberg's theory of moral development is post-convictional morality, which explains the development of a personal code of ethics and rules are internalized. The fifth stage in this level is social contract orientation, and the sixth stage is universal ethnic principles. Loss of self-esteem results in the violation of these principles. Next, I want to discuss the 5 characteristics that distinguish emerging adulthood from other periods. Identify exploration, instability, and a more self-focused perspective, a feeling of in-between in the age of possibility. Robert Steinberg's triangular theory of love describes types of love based on 3 different scales: intimacy, passion, and commitment. They each represent 7 types of love, with infatuation being passion, liking intimacy, empty love is commitment, fatuous love is commitment and passion, romantic love is passion and intimacy, companionate love is intimacy and commitment, consummate love is passion, intimacy, and commitment. Menopause is something that occurs in the midlife with women and is usually accompanied with physical symptoms such as hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal dryness, and a reduced sex drive. This can impact a person in middle adulthood by increased anxiety, changes in mood, and a reduced sex drive. The 3 stages of late adulthood are young old, which lasts from 65 to 74, old, lasting from 75 to 84, and oldest old, lasting from 85 and on. Wisdom is something that is usually acquired and most recognized among older people. Wisdom is the expertise in the conduct and meaning of life. Researchers have found that the impact of age and culture on wisdom is more valuable in a society or culture where change does not occur often, making their wisdom very useful. Kübler-Ross's theory of death and dying is broken into 5 components. Those components are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Although this is an average process we all go through, some stages may take longer than others, which may put limitations on his theory. I've learned many valuable tools that I will use in my psychological career field of study. I now have a much better understanding of how humans develop over the lifespan. I now have a good amount of knowledge on some popular theorists and can adequately say I know how humans develop. I am beyond grateful for the abundance of knowledge I've learned while taking this class, and am ecstatic to share it with my patients in the future years to come. Thank you so much.